Good morning, everyone. Thank you for braving the traffic and getting here early. I'd like to start by introducing the panel. So on my immediate left, Jeff Meyer, the MD for Asia for Ironman. In the middle, Mr. Un Jin Tek, former CEO of Sports Singapore and the Sports Hub. And on the far left, Sam Middlehurst, co-founder of the Music Run and CEO of Fresh Events. Please give them a little round of applause and cheer and scream and shout and whatever. So today we're here to discuss build or buy mass participation as a strategy. And I thought maybe just useful to set the scene by talking a little bit about what is mass participation. I often get asked, well, how do you define mass participation? And I used to define it along, I guess, what I call the traditional mass participation: marathons, triathlons, cycling events, swimming, obstacle races, obviously relatively new in the last probably 10 or 12 years or so. Last year, I was asked to present an award at the Sports Industry Asia Awards for the best mass participation event in Asia, and it was presented to a 3-on-3 basketball tournament with 64,000 participants in China. And I guess, how can you say that 64,000 participants isn't mass participation? I guess got me thinking a little bit, and the realization that there's many elements to mass participation. I guess you could call a concert mass participation. Clearly, there's lots of mass participation events happening every weekend in Hong Kong right now without too much sport involved in them. But I think really increasingly we should include grassroots sport, thousands, tens of thousands of people participating in team sports on a grassroots level. So, in terms of build or buy, I think my sense is that in most cities, mass participation happens kind of by accident. There's very few cities that I'm aware of where I see a strategy around encouraging, building mass participation events, facilitating the ecosystem. And I guess the background to this panel is this discussion around what are the relative pros and cons and benefits. Not that anyone's right or one's wrong, but cities spend hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars bidding for events which come to town. They last, sometimes maybe they're a one-off like the Youth Olympic Games. They might be 4 or 5 years, maybe 5 years like the WTA, and they move on. And they all bring benefits to town. But you then look at something like the Singapore Marathon, that's now been here for 15 years, grown from a few thousand to at one stage 60,000, and I think now probably expecting around 50,000, Jeff, for this year. The impact that has on the community on an ongoing basis, which leads me to, I guess, the other scene setter before we start speaking to the panel is very often the success of these events seems to be measured by economic impact. We have tourism at the table, we have sport at the table. In my 35 years in the industry, I've seldom seen health at the table. And I think the very overlooked opportunity that these events produce is the impact that they have on the social and health well-being of communities. And what I'm starting to find over the last 5 to 6 months, I'm having more and more conversations with cities and governments that are starting to recognize those. I think the challenge is how do we measure them, and that's something that I think we can explore. You get these people that sign up for a marathon 6 months, 8 months in advance. They train. We're doing some work with a behavioral economist at the moment whose belief is that the ripple effect goes 10 deep. So I'm the stone in the water who participates in the marathon, and I create a ripple that goes 10 people deep, whether that be my family having a more healthy lifestyle, exercising, eating, whether it be my work colleagues, my extended family, friends, and so on, getting some kind of benefit from the fact of me participating in an event. I'm not sure that happens when you bid for a tennis event or a soccer event. That might go a couple of people deep, but I'm not certain that participating and being a spectator in an event has that level of impact from a health and social impact. So something that I'm fairly passionate about. I'm the co-founder and CEO of an organization called Mass Participation World in terms of looking to, I guess, bring the industry together. So in terms of moving on with some discussion, and love to keep it informal, please feel free at any stage if you've got a question or a comment that you'd like to add, put your hand up, and we'd love to engage with the audience. But I might, if I may, start with you, Jin-Tek, because I think you've got significant experience on both sides of the table. So starting off as CEO of SSC, as it was in those days, now Sports Singapore, seen the marathon growing from, in 2002 we had about 5,000 people. You were involved in that, and it's now, at its peak in 2009, it was 60,000 people. And then obviously wearing your CEO of Sports Hub hat, you've been involved in events that are fundamentally bought rights for the likes of the WTA, the ICC, International Club Challenge, the HSBC Sevens, and just love to get some of your insights for a few minutes in what you've seen, the relative challenges and pros and cons in that space, please, Jin-Tek.
Thank you, Chris. I will try to share from the perspective of the times, the 2000-2010 period when I was a Sports Council or Sports Singapore, and then subsequently the Sports Hub was 2011, that period, right? So I'll try to differentiate that. And some of the examples I'll share, for example, the Stanchart Singapore Marathon, it will be stories around that period, which is essentially has evolved, right? So Jeff is going to talk about this last so-called segment. In fact, I used to work with Chris. Chris was actually with Spectrum Worldwide, right? And he was also helping us and grow this event. And then, of course, with Sam, with the new event and the fundamental shift in some of the things. So he'll give that perspective. But I think the best way to describe it was, Chris is absolutely correct. At that point of time, health and the partner in health, Ministry of Health, Health Promotion Board, and so on, wasn't really in the picture. It was still pretty much a sports push, a participation push. In fact, if anything, it's probably more of the community social type of push. Right? And as we started looking at events of that nature, tourism obviously was heavily involved in some events, the key events. But I think overall at that point of time, it was still very much sports oriented. Now, having said that, right, the fundamentals about looking for sports and so on, and for events for that matter, we went through a process. The process was something like this, which is not rocket science, but there were lots of events, right? You can say tens of thousands of events. But the question has always been, and there's an iteration here that we kept asking ourselves, right? Which event meets the tiering and the positioning of what Singapore wanted, right? So that iteration where we talk about ourselves and we actually, go out the market and look for it, and also begin asking ourselves what is missing, what are the gaps, and then it came into the selection process. And the selection process here, and I want to share with you the selection process where we had, and this is something which I think is important. Give me 1 second. Now, the event selection process, I think, builds, if you take the output angle and work backwards, right? The outcomes rather, and work backwards from there. Then it starts to give you a sensing about what events actually make sense for the portfolio. You'll hear me talk about portfolio a lot, and because it is the way we've been pushing it in Singapore at least, no? So event selection criteria, something like this, right? One, for the whole government. For the whole government, from a macro perspective downwards, you got to look at the positioning for the country, the city branding, the placemaking, destination appeal, stuff that tourism board will be very, very keen to push. Then you got, obviously, the tourism impact, economic impact, social, health, wellness. Now, some of these are, I would say, the health side wasn't really at the pinnacle of things at the point of time, but now it is in the last 5-10 years, I think it is. And then for the Singapore Sports Council Angle Sports, we were looking a lot at the participation rate, the pathway towards excellence, even capacity and capability building for coaches, for officials and stuff like that, right? And then the venue, whether it's run by the government or not, we looked at the profitability, the infrastructure readiness, and then of course third-party suppliers, which is very key. The profitability for these people, whether it makes sense, and the job creation, employment. I used to always say that Stanchart Marathon created two basic jobs. One was the barriers, people who move the barriers, and the other one was the portable toilets, right? Those are new markets that never had jobs before, right? And then the last one, which also was important, but we didn't know much and we didn't address much of it, would be the impact for the brands and the sponsors. And that one, I think, as it goes along, I will talk a bit more. Okay, so I think that kind of valuation criteria started to make sense into what we did, and then subsequently led to a variety of events from spectatorship type, which is the high-end stuff, all the way to the mass participation events. Now, in a quick one, I'll just mention, in the sports hub angle, obviously this is the latter years, we were a bit more in tune with what was needed, brought in many of the other evaluation criteria and so on, and took into consideration the larger transformation where the consumers was more interested in the holistic angle where sports entertainment lifestyle made sense, right? So we built on that concentric circle angle where sports may be here, but you needed to fulfill it with entertainment lifestyle content around it, and build across the calendar year, right? So I'll talk a lot more about it with examples and so on.
Thanks, Jin-Tek. I love the comment about the barricades. The first event I organised here in 2003 was the JP Morgan Corporate Challenge, and we had to truck barricades in, the Tour de Langkawi barricades in from Malaysia. And if I had $1 for every time I've said I was in the wrong business, I should have started a barricade business. I think there's a couple of multi-million-dollar businesses in town that have been spawned from the industry. But I think it's a very valid point. So we talk about economic impact, but the jobs that get created, the ecosystem that gets created, and the support that needs. Jeff, you're now at I guess the pointy end of this journey, which is amazing in terms of now becoming a night event, the marathon potentially very soon being the 7th World Marathon Major, and clearly that can't happen without an ecosystem and lots of challenges to be overcome. Maybe give us some insights in terms of the journey over the last couple of years since you've taken over the marathon and built it to where it is, and how you've seen it impacting the ecosystem and how important government involvement has been to that.
Definitely. That's a hard one. It's been a long journey, so to speak. When we took over the marathon sort of 3.5 years ago, we had the ambition to take it to the World Marathon Majors. Now, that's no easy feat in itself. There is a very strict criteria and what you've got to do to achieve that. It was never going to work unless we had a whole of government support behind it. Otherwise you'd be just hitting brick walls after brick walls after brick walls. So we actually had to go to Cabinet, and that took probably 3 years of my life, and many years, I would say, of my life, getting it to Cabinet, getting it through Cabinet, and having it approved by that, so that we did have a whole of government approach. We're still probably not there 100% of the way, but it's made life a lot easier to do it. To take on any event like this is truly, I mean, to be honest, this is in some ways Singapore's Olympics, I say. It's their chance to be on par with London, New York, Chicago, Boston, Berlin, Tokyo. These events, their economic impacts are truly significant. 450 million economic impact for New York, so to speak. New York Marathon, it is the biggest inbound weekend flight-wise of the whole year. It beats Christmas, it beats Thanksgiving. There is more planes flying into New York full that weekend. And if you go there, 50% of the athletes are from all around the world, and only probably about 5% are actually from New York itself. So they are monster-size events. But to sort of give a bit more of a better example, I think, because it's a hard one, like I said, we work in the tourism department. We work in tourism just as much as we work in events. We come into new cities and we're basically a circus that comes to town, and I'm more sort of talking about our Ironman events. And to give a good example would be Ironman Cairns. the launching pad to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. The government wanted us to come in there because the Japanese tourists all of a sudden stopped coming. So they needed events to hit that economic impact and all the rest of it. We came there and no one really knew what we were all about. We took over the fantastic road that went from Cairns to Port Douglas. We weren't liked, put it that way. We were closing roads, we were disruptive, we were all those kind of things. So there was quite a protest about us coming to town until they started seeing the benefits of what we do. There was, people in hotels, there was people in the taxis, there was people in the restaurants. They brought their families with us because to achieve an Ironman, it's a significant event. So they bring multiple people with them. Then the crowd started going, hey, we're actually benefiting from this. So it turned from, you guys are a pain in the backside, to now it is one of the biggest events we've got in Australia. It brings thousands upon thousands. It brings economic impact. We have TV coverage that gets beamed around the world, and Cairns gets highlighted in that regard. There is now more gymnasiums that have opened up there. There are now more bike shops opened up there. There are now more kids doing exercise and things, because like you're talking about the environment, that's the kind of thing that can resonate from these events. People get inspired. People come to an Ironman or a marathon, they get motivated, and then they take steps towards that. That's sort of the other impacts that people don't see. And they're people that go up there, 6 weeks before to train on the course because they want to get it, a part of what it's all about. So there's all these things that come, the social benefits, the health benefits, the charity benefits that add on to one event. An event for us is not one weekend, because most of our events sell out, a year in advance, if not 6 months in advance. The Singapore Marathon, I have a database of over 35,000 people that have already entered. We're already doing training camps for them and pacer runs and all these things. So there's already economic impact from these things going on. We're already producing healthier people. We're already inspiring people. So there is a lot more to it than just an economic impact at the end of the week.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I was last year, I think, at the event up in China with which Branded puts on as well. I was talking to David Yang, Sports Connects China, and David Yang is the CEO of Wanda Sports, and he was sharing on a panel the story of when Ironman first came to China. One of their biggest limiting factors was that most people don't swim freestyle. So they put all these, so the legacy in terms of a social and health impact is, there's now thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people that know how to swim freestyle and swim more often. You spoke a lot about economic impact. Do you measure or increasingly finding awareness of the health and social impact? And are there measures? It's very easy to measure economic impact, X number of tourists times number of nights. My sense is people are talking about social impact, but not quite sure how to measure it. It's a little bit, kind of feel good at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, look, it depends. And I've worked across the Asia-Pacific region a lot over the last 30 years, and it goes from government to government, and everyone has different sort of priorities and the like. I think I sort of said before, if Australia is an island, it's a tourism island, it generates those things. They would definitely, it's all about economic impact. It has to be return on investment. If you go to any tourism, they'll say 4-to-1 return is the minimum you'll get, 10-to-1 is a great event, is a good event, 50-to-1 is an outstanding event. One of mine, Noosa Triathlon, gives about a 75-to-1 release on that. But they are now starting to look at, okay, well, what are the B2B sort of attributes? What are the charity attributes? What are the social attributes? And like I said, if you go to these areas, like Noosa Triathlon has generated so much, but there is more bike shops in Noosa, if you know the Sunshine Coast of Queensland, more bike shops there per capita than anywhere else in Australia. Gymnasiums, there is more people there doing the health and fitness and lifestyle than anywhere else. They've got more Olympic swimming pools pretty much in that Sunshine Coast region than pretty much everywhere else as well. And it's these type of events that are the inspirational factor up here that generates a groundswell, down the bottom. them. So it is a community that is based around health and fitness. You only have to go there for a week and understand that sort of thing. And it's the same with the marathon, I mean, and cycling and those kind of things that are happening in Singapore. Singapore 10, 15 years ago, no one was cycling. Now you get up every morning, usually before dark, and there's hundreds of cyclists everywhere. If running, 10, 15 years ago, there wasn't too many people running around the place, but you go outside of Marina Bay every evening, there is thousands upon thousands. To have a country that is only really 5+ million, 6 million, and to have an event that is generating 50,000 runners, that is pretty incredible. And that's been a, exponential growth over that time.
All right, thank you. Sam, switching across to you. So the music run, I guess, slightly different end of the spectrum from the endurance event that Jeff's been talking about. I'm interested to talk about the brand side of things. So you built the music run with AIA, doing some different things now, and you're now working with CIMB. And we were talking about a brand coming to you, seeing the event as a platform. A conversation between the two of you, working out that you could achieve their objectives. And I'd love for you just to share a little bit about a brand having a mass participation strategy, in keeping with our theme.
I think one of the things that's interesting that we talked a lot about here is the impact that events create, and obviously the commercial model behind the event is something that probably doesn't get talked about that often. Us as people within the industry, we have to look at different ways that we can generate revenues in order to be able to put on this show that we do for the public. Brand partnerships is an incredibly important thing that we look to, because often when you're building something from scratch, initially it's quite difficult to get that support from the government. I think we've heard some interesting insights as to the stage that you need to be at in order to be able to create a return. For a brand, I think you can have a conversation earlier. If I just use the two examples that we have of two different brands who had two different relationships with mass participation, AIA, most of you will probably be quite familiar with them. The fit with AIA was interesting in that they wanted to appeal to a younger consumer. They wanted to be ultimately promoting people to be fitter and healthier. And it's not rocket science to work out why an insurance company who provides insurance policies around health wants people to be healthier, because it means their premiums in the long run are going to pay out less. So it's a really important part of their business model is to try and work out ways in which they can engage with their consumer and get them to be healthier and fitter. I think when we created the music run, we looked at using music as a way of getting people to be more active. We talk about kind of living the beat and leading a more active lifestyle. Music is a very sticky relationship with a younger consumer, particularly that Gen Z and that millennial consumer. And it was how do we use the narrative of music to work with fitness to get people into the sport. I think one of the things that I find really interesting is anyone who goes on an active journey themselves, Ironman will always be the top of the tent pole. Like if you really progress through that funnel, you end up looking at, am I going to take on doing an Ironman event? And for us, one of the things that's really interesting is last year, if I look across our events, we had 26% of our participants had never done an organized running event before. Okay, so the Music Run as a platform was a springboard to actually trying we call them active experiences, because it's not a marathon. It's a 5 or a 10 kilometer run. It can be timed or it can be untimed. It depends on what you want to do. But what our participants were feeding back to us was this was a fun shared experience that they did with their friends. And over 40% of our participants were signing up with 5 or more people. When we then asked them, okay, well, like, what's the next thing that you look to with the event? The next thing was the music. The music was what was bringing them to the table, and that was a different experience. It was also, promoting live talent, and the run was actually the third thing that was cited. So when we had a conversation with CIMB, the conversation with CIMB was quite different to the conversation they had with AIA. They had different reasons for wanting to be associated with the event. the number one reason that CIMB looked at was, how do I get a relationship with that younger consumer? I can't open a bank account in Malaysia, for example, till I'm 18. If I can be front of mind with that 18-year-old when they're opening their first bank account, or when they're opening a student account if they're going to university, for example, then that's something that makes sense to me from trying to acquire a consumer. I think the second thing that was interesting with CIMB is they've just announced earlier this year they've got a new 5-year strategy, and at the top of the agenda on that 5-year strategy is trying to position themselves as a bank who cares about sustainability. And I think that is a big narrative for them, and they wanted ways to look at how they bring that to life. How do we actually take something and put some substance behind it? And events is a great way of demonstrating that you can actually bring sustainability to life. So this year at the event in Kuala Lumpur, we come up with a strategy with CIMB where we will be working with a company called YTL Carbon to measure all of our carbon footprint from the event, and we'll be offsetting all the carbon credits against the project that CIMB selects. We're eliminating all plastic water bottles from the event, so CIMB will be giving everyone in their run pack a reusable water bottle, and we will be working to deliver water solutions throughout the event. We'll still have compostable cups, but they will all be compostable and everything will be recycled at the event. We work with our merchandise partner to eliminate all single-use plastics from our run pack, so your shirts will not be coming with plastic wrapping. These things, they sound simple things to do, but there's a hell of a lot of work that goes in to actually make these things happen. And when you start to bring these different strands to life, you start to be able to deliver on a strategy that a brand partner has kind of come to us and said, how do we work together to use mass participation to create an amplified message around sustainability? We can deliver that for 20,000 people at the event, and then we can also then run that through all of our media PR channels to create a bigger awareness about that campaign. The end goal is to create a blueprint which we openly share for CIMB to work with on their other properties, about how we approach running a sustainable event, and hopefully we can come to the industry and share our learnings of some of the challenges that we faced in trying to do these things, to actually make mass participation events adopt more sustainable practices. And I think if we can contribute to that, it's a great story for a brand partnership. It's a great story for the industry. So those are some of the things that we've done with brands to try and deliver a return to them, because ultimately without brand support, our events don't happen. We're still very small. We're still growing. We'd love to be getting more support from different governments that we approach, but it's a journey, and it takes time. And as a result, in this part of the world, brand partnerships are really lifeblood of mass participation events.
Thanks, Sam. And so you've been, I think, in 11 countries with Music Run, and in terms of where you see mass participation as a strategy, coming back to the theme, have there been many countries that you've worked in across the region and the world where you see it as relatively easy, or is this kind of greenfield, great opportunity for governments and cities to start embracing the space and making it easier to do business as a mass event? Yeah,
I mean our focus is really has been in Asia, and being honest, we've received very little support from government agencies. In our 6th year of operating now, we've the Malaysian government has given us a seat at the table to come and explain kind of where we want to take things. We started in Malaysia. We did our first event in Malaysia. I think there's a huge opportunity if we can deliver value back to governments and enable them to achieve some of the objectives they have. I think mass can be a great platform to reach a lot of people. I think we can do that at multiple levels, where we come into contact with a lot of people. We also have a platform where we can create amplified messages. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think I was sharing with you, with Malaysia's relatively new Minister of Youth and Sport, the youngest youth minister in the world. He has very big plans. He has a strong buy-in from a young Malaysian audience, I think, because he represents that audience himself, and he really is positive about mass participation, particularly running as a way of reaching a lot of people and trying to promote a fitter and healthier Malaysia. And genuinely, in Malaysia, there's big health problems right now in terms of obesity, diabetes, particularly amongst the youth, particularly amongst the Malay population. And mass participation is an unbelievably powerful way of actually engaging with these audiences, but it needs to be a collaborative effort from platforms such as ourselves, from the different agencies that we can work with to open doors rather than close them. I think just to share one other interesting thing that a lot of people probably aren't aware with, and to use the Malaysian example again, very sadly, again, we talked about what is a mass participation event, what is not a mass participation event. Back in 2014, you may or may not be aware, Future Music Festival in Malaysia, there was a very sad situation where a number of young people lost their lives. What was the root cause of that, I think, is still in question if you look at the coroner's reports. But the government had a very negative reaction around that, and drugs were connected with EDM music, and as a result there was a blanket ban that was put on EDM music in Malaysia, and pretty much overnight from 2014 up until now, it's very difficult to actually get EDM DJs to come into Malaysia. So we had a very interesting meeting with the government body where we want to promote local talent, and if anyone was listening to the Universal Music's presentation yesterday, promoting local hip hop talent, local EDM talent is a big thing that the industry is trying to do. But to get that actually happening in a live event environment is challenging in certain places, Malaysia being an example of that. So we're an event in Malaysia, we're at the National Stadium, we work with KL Sports City under its new management, Tony Fernandez. We bring 20,000 people to the stadium. Our average age is 23. There's no alcohol, there's no drugs, yet we're not able to bring in an EDM DJ because of something that's happened previously and the negative associations attached with it. So I think that's an interesting example where if we're going to really make an impact, we need to just be a bit more open and reassess some of these things.
Thanks. A couple of great case studies there. Thank you. Jin Taek, coming back to you, if I may, you spoke a little bit earlier about the kind of portfolio approach, and I think the numbers you shared with me, Sports Hub, 210 events, 3 million attendees, and about 15 million of footfall during the course of the year. Some of those bought events in terms of rights, and some of them mass participation. WTA has been here for 5 years. It's no longer. ICC, I think, has 1 year to go. Interested your kind of sense of, WTA, what's the halo of that? How long does it last? What impact has it had on the community relative to the events that you as the Sports Hub have built? You have all the community events, which obviously growing slowly but surely, the play days and the active Singapore days, but just the relative pros and cons and the challenges. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting one's right and another's wrong, but it's that portfolio approach of how do you get the mix right, where you've got some which are bought, where the halo might last for a little while, others which are growing like the marathon, and how do they all mesh together in your opinion, please?
Well, a project exists for a reason, and most of the projects will have to exist for a larger holistic view than just simply one English Premier League team, like Manchester United or something, right? So if a project therefore exists for different reasons, we got to take again the expected outputs and work backwards. And with Singapore Sports Hub, and the objective obviously is to to be everything to everybody, which is, in marketing 101, you tell you focus, 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 right? And so if you want to do that, it essentially means that you got to do things from recreational to competitive, community stuff to commercial stuff, right? The whole blanket of it. And to do that, it is not just that you have to do it, but there is a logic behind this as well. Now let's talk through the logic behind this, right? So if you want a place to be vibrant, and Singapore has one opportunity to build a project of this size, of this nature. You build one, China builds 25 of them, right? So you got to get it right, which means vibrancy, which means active, so-called patronage by the community and so on, and tourism and so on, right? So you got to make sure that. Then therefore, if you look at simple metrics like footfall numbers, spectatorship numbers, participation numbers, eyeball numbers, these are numbers here that will make sense to the respective stakeholders. And again, you work backwards from there. And you work backwards from there. In a project, not all events make money, and therefore, again, you got to go to the portfolio approach, right? Some make money, some don't make money, but the crux of the whole thing is that it's not about private sector running it who needs to make money, government who doesn't need to make money, and so on. But actually, you think of the whole logic here. We are a destination trade. We need to draw people in. To draw people in, we got to have the attractive content. The attractive content that hits all target segments, being everything to everybody, right? So to attract all that, you essentially means that for all the target audience there, they must come here for a reason. So we have a list of 43 action verbs. You come here to shop, to eat, to swim, to climb, to etc., right? The action verbs translate into solutions and offerings and programs. And then you keep building it, because we are also in a fast-moving consumer good business, because you're dealing with consumers and patrons, So you got to keep adjusting the consumer mix there. And the consumer mix, consumers also have a requirement to change the content all the time. Right. So because of that, the fact that we need to draw people in, which means you got to draw the numbers in. When you draw the numbers in, you start to go after the footfall numbers, the spectatorship numbers, everything. All these numbers come in. It will obviously meet many of the government so-called wishes. Right, the KPIs from the government, which is vibrancy, support of the ownership of people, and things like that. Not necessarily making money, but it is then our duty then to monetize. Right, it is my duty, it's our duty to monetize. If you can bring the footfall and numbers in, then you monetize. If you can't monetize, that's a private sector problem. Okay, so it's a process. It's a process where what it takes to play is to get the numbers in, and then what it takes to win is where you start to monetize and commercialize things, right? So in this logic here, our content here needs to have that variety of things that move from hourly, daily, weekly, weekendly, monthly, annually, and then looking at things that will bring them in at a different time of the calendar, and then how do they stay longer, and how do they come back again. And that's where you start to monetize things, right? And so the content itself will just build from there. And you build from there, you would then be able to achieve all these objectives that helps to achieve, the so-called helps to get to the point. Now, if I can take a quick one also, just to touch, because Jeff mentioned about the Stanchart Marathon, the mass event here, and I think it's very, very important for us to understand. The period that we drove the growth of this event, and this may be a bit of history here, but I'll touch on it very quickly. From 2002, when it was about 5,000-6,000, we grew it from then to 14,000, 21,000, 28,000, 38,000, 43,000, and in 2009 we hit 60,000. Right? And 2010 we hit 60,000, but we started scaling back because our customer satisfaction surveys started going down. Right, the numbers were there. The bottleneck was with the venue, as in the Padang area and the routes and so on, right? So having more and more and more, at one stage, Chris will remember, there was another objective set by our politicians, right, to be 100,000. In 2007, the minister came to me and said, you've been growing this event very well. We want you to hit 50,000 as an objective. At that point, we were like 20, 30,000, right? And he said to hit 50,000. Why? Because Singapore used to have the football, old national stadium football, and the kind of crowd and so on. Whereas there wasn't any that could bring that kind of crowd anymore. Right? And then the old national stadium was being torn down, etc., etc. And so we started going down this path to grow the event. And as you look at the participation rates, now for every one person, it could be a 1:2 ratio. You could have 2 supporters along. Right, not to mention all the eyeballs and those who are following and tracking from offsite. Okay, so the numbers here are tremendous. Now, what is not done well to me is we haven't done to communicate well to the brand and the sponsors here to understand this monetization or the commercial element of piggybacking on this. And this is in the early days, and that phase of development, and Jeff has taken it to another phase now, and then you got a new concept here coming in. During the phase, we looked at 3 basic things. The product offering got to be excellent, right? Product offering, which means you got to have good routes, and the routes change so many times. Not to mention the routes that allows, we had to invent a buggy system for first aiders to get to the thing with time, KPI times, to get in and get out, right? So the products itself got to be good, and then we got to make sure all the partners come in. The road race is not a venue race. A venue race is very simple. You're all in 4 walls, so to speak, right? A road race, you touch stakeholders left, right, center. Everybody has a complaint, right? Then you have the customer experience angle. The runner's experience is so critical, right? Because they are the word of mouth. They tell you if they want to keep wearing the Stanchart shirt to run for the 350 days and talk about the Stanchart Marathon as the pinnacle event. So we grew the running event from about 5 or 6 per year to about 50 per year. Right, and so you grow the event concentric circle, sports, entertainment, lifestyle. You grow it bigger, and you grow it lengthwise, calendar-wise, and you expand it that way. Right, so that's basically the logic for it, which then allows you to propel into the next wave of transformation and focus into what we see now.
Thanks, Jin-Taek. You mentioned National Stadium being pulled down, and remember that happening, and then you were obviously involved in the planning and building of the new sports hub. Putting you on the spot a little bit, if you look at where it is today compared to where it was dreamed to be, what are the things which have been the highs, and where are the gaps that still potentially need to be filled?
Any journalists here? No, just kidding. I think. The project itself is complex to begin with, right? There is few, or in fact there was none at that point of time, where there was this integrated model, where when Singapore saw this opportunity here, we saw a trend moving from single venue in single city to multiple venues in single city to a clustering of venues. And this clustering of venues allowed us in a small space to begin to bring what we wanted into the space. And we also saw at the same time consumer trends that were moving into an integrated lifestyle. Families coming together, people coming together in their lifestyle. So the software, hardware side started to make sense, right? But the complexity is that you then have to put everything into one confined space here. What many people, and just a sidetrack here, what many people don't understand is behind this in the National Stadium itself is got a massive supply chain that's happening in there. That to me, I always say this is an MBA case study here, right? Massive supply chain that deals with athletes, performance, setup, ingredients, rubbish, track, everything that's moving around that, right? So the complexity here means that you got to do all those things and be able to so-called satisfy all the stakeholders, government, to all your corporates, your sponsors, to your hirers, to promoters, and consumers, right? Consumers here are so you got to, it's multi-stakeholder management here. You can't satisfy everybody. So, and as we started with the pitch problem, right? The pitch problem is not only solved, it's now world class right now. Two years in a row, it's been stated as world class right now. So, I think this project is on track per the promises. Now, I think Singapore's objective, but at the same time, has got larger vision, larger objectives. It's got also the fact that this portfolio of content here needs to be of certain type, certain shape. So it's really up to the management and shareholders to now bring it forward.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the floor? Has anyone got any comments or questions they'd like to make? Yeah, we got one up the back there.
I've got a question for Sam. Yeah, you mentioned that Fresh Events is a relatively new event now. So what is your advice for new event companies under 5 years, for example, to handle events that involves an expert?
It's a good question. Yeah, what's my advice? Don't do it. No, I mean, myself, I was in management consulting. I've got two business partners. One was in advertising, and the other one was in kind of sports events. So we had three different perspectives when we started. I think my lack of experience within mass participation was a good thing, because I approached things kind of unaware of some of the challenges that you would face. So naivety probably helped us through the first couple of years where it was quite difficult, if I'm being honest. But what would be my takeaways? Number one, most important thing, understand your business model. Because if you don't understand your business model and you're not really clear on how you're going to grow that business model, you'll fail. I'll tell you that right now. I think the second thing that's incredibly important is to really focus on who your consumer is, who your customer is. Know everything about that customer. Know what they want, know why they want it. The question that we always ask ourselves now is, who shows up and why do they show up? If you can't answer that question really, really clearly, then again, I think you're going to struggle, because they are your lifeblood. So if you start understanding that customer, you start knowing what they want, you start being able to collect information on them, you can then go and have conversations with other people who want to have a relationship with that customer. And that's where, if you can show and demonstrate that they're going to turn up and they're going to pay a certain amount of money potentially to turn up, you now have an income stream, and you also have someone who's present at your event, and you have other people who that is of value to, such as brand partners, such as other stakeholders. So I think those two things are super important. Clear idea of your business model and really knowing who your customer is. My perspective is you need to really create the best experience for that customer, but it's kind of permission to play really in the industry right now, is if you can't create a great experience for that customer, one that really is going to resonate with them, then I think you'll struggle on the other things, because it's a cluttered space. There's a lot of people trying to do it. I think a lot of people don't really understand the complexity behind it. We were certainly in that boat when we started out, and that's why I say that naivety was probably a good thing. But I think if you've got a really good experience that you want to create for someone, you really understand what they want and how to reach that person, then you can. It's a brilliant business to be in, because at the end of the day, our job is about providing an experience for people that they can have with their family and friends. It's connecting people in a physical space. And when you turn up on the day and you see all that hard work that's gone into it, and that's a pretty rewarding feeling. And I think ultimately we can kind of take a step back and actually look at some of the things that we've created. You look at what Jeff's doing at the moment with Ironman. For me, as someone who consumes mass participation events as well as working in them, completing an Ironman experience is something that I'm going to do. Like there's no doubt about it. But that's my own personal journey that I'm going on, and yet I'm at the other end in terms of the experience that I'm creating, which is I'm trying to get people into the industry by using something that I believe is a passion point for that young audience, which is around music and a social experience, and then connecting that with activity to try and get people to become more active. And if one person from our event goes on and does an Ironman, they'll have gone through that full spectrum of the mass participation journey, and I think that's a pretty cool thing.
Chris, can I add a few points? If I can jump in with 4 points to share with you, right? One, you are in a fast-moving consumer good business. So you are a consumer business, right? Now, if you are in that space, you therefore got to take the best practices in the consumer marketing, consumer business angle, and in every sense of the word, right? This is not sports, this is not events, this is actually consumer business. Second point is that you got to research like hell, because the research here is that new products launched in general statement here, 60-70% of new products launched in any industry fails. Okay, so your research here means you got to go at different tiers, right? Firstly, what kind of events, what kind of things are happening, what people want, the lifestyle changes, and then you go into running events, you start to move into shape run, music run, and start to understand, do a lot of research, right? Your research here will direct you towards something that you start to understand it. Third point is know where your revenue sources are going to come from, right? State that. Don't worry about expense, okay? Because your expense will be defined by revenue sources, because your revenue sources will have to address the key stakeholders like government grants, like sponsors, like the ticketing, like these. Because once you start addressing those revenue sources, you begin to understand what it takes to deliver, what kind to deliver, what, to what degree, right? And that must be at the top of your thing, because most people start off expecting that this is a government grant thing and it's going to be government grant for the next infinite years, right? It doesn't work that way, right? And in some cases, government grant doesn't come in, and therefore you start with your revenue sources. Then comes your and from there your product, but build or bid, right? Build or bid to create a product, and then finally your experience with all the key stakeholders, and not just the runners and not just the participants, but your people, your supporters, and stuff like that. So you just think of these basic 4 or 5 points. I think you got a bit.
Just, I think, really good points, much better than my ones. I think that just to add on to the first point about consumer marketing, one of the things that we looked at is effectively when you're selling tickets, you're an e-commerce platform, and so performance marketing is 101 for being able to do business. And I think so many people in the mass participation event space don't actually understand the basics of how performance marketing works. So go and do some homework on that, really kind of read up, understand how it works, because that is how you're going to communicate with most of your audience. That's how you're going to build the relationship. And it's all about trying to reduce your cost of acquisition and trying to increase your retention rate so that you get more lifetime value out of that consumer. Like, that is the basic business model that we work on as a mass participation business. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that.
Just like to come back, because you guys have this amazing journey which Sam started about, Ironman, the 5150 and the 70.3 and Kona at the tip of the pinnacle. I saw some incredible images, both photos and video this week of your World Championships in Nice, and if it hadn't been for the tri-bars on the bike course, I would have thought we were watching footage of the Tour de France. It was absolutely incredible, the crowds that were there and everything. Coming back to our theme of bid or buy, I'm interested in the model around your World Championships, which rotate around the world, but I would imagine, if I understand it correctly, kind of slightly different. You don't set up a new event in a town to be a World Championship. You've built this ecosystem that kind of ties in with the build theme, that there's a 70.3 that's been in Nice for many years, and it becomes the World Championships. And you had, I think they were in Cape Town last year, the 70.3. So you're kind of different from a typical buy model where you can have the WTA Championships in Singapore for 5 years and then someone else outbids you and it disappears. You're kind of leaving a legacy and then making it a World Championship, and you've got this sustainability that's built into that. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, to answer your question, everything is about legacy. To be honest, I look at sort of portfolios and all these kind of things, and what do they want out of it is this sort of the question. And I think your focus needs to be, there's got to be a certain focus that you want. I've got Tourism Queensland over here with tourism events, so I can dump them into it. if you go to Victorian major events, their key focus, they only want one thing, is big Grand Slam events. They have the Grand Slam tennis, they have the F1, they have the golf major. They won't touch anything unless it's a world-class premium thing. That's their thing. Queensland works on more mass participation. They want to generate people to come into their place. So they have big triathlon focus, big running focus, Masters Games focus, all those kind of things, which generates for them as well. For us in Ironman, we've created a journey. People enter a year in advance to these things. People chase our World Championship spots at either Hawaii for the full distance, or we rotate around the world, which has been really successful for us over the last few years. Sunshine Coast, massive event, Nice on the weekend. Only the top 2 or 3% actually get to go and compete in those World Championships, but it really motivates everyone once they start doing an Ironman that they want to be part of those big World Championship events. And again, I come back to sort of legacy of what does your event do. If Singapore, I know Singapore wants to be on the stage and be internationally recognised, so that's a legacy. If it's a legacy that you want to be more health and fitness, that's a legacy that grows more athletes and more kids being inspired and health and fitness benefits that you see. Everything goes in that regards. And back to your question, there's 153 runs in Singapore last year. That's unsustainable. They're cannibalising each other at the moment, and there's event managers falling over left, right and centre. You've really got to have a dedicated focus of what you're all about. Sam's business is great because they've got a very much a unique market that they're chasing. But if you're going to go out and run a Hello Kitty run or a Star Wars run or a zombie run or whatever, unless you're having repeat visitation, you're in big trouble. We work in Ironman on sort of, if we've got 30 to 40% of our athlete base is new to a new race, that's great because we're creating new athletes. But we always live on that we have around 60 to 70% of our athletes are return visitors. If you're doing events that are 100% newbies, I wish you luck. You've got to have that thing. And to me, the whole industry is a bit like the gymnasium industry. You had aerobics, then you had step class, then you had jazzercise, then you had pump, and then you had whatever. The events industry is sort of going through this model. And you're getting all these things coming out, and I've seen huge ones. I mean, you look at Tough Mudder we had in Queensland there for a while. 24,000 people in the first year. Fantastic event. The next year was 9,000. The next year they pulled the pin. So you've got to have that kind, and they're still around and they're still doing great in certain areas, but they're not on that huge sort of Everest. So if I can sort of say something to you, you've really got to understand what your offering is and what the longevity of that offer is, because there's a lot of people in the industry at the moment that are just coming in for a quick burn and trying to create something and then sell it. There's a lot of that, and I think that's where government comes in, and I think a lot of them are starting to wake up that go, hey, where is the longevity in this? And it's more of a partnership model that you've got to work with. You've got to work with your commercial partners on a longevity sort of plan. You've got to work with governments because they won't touch you with a barge pole unless you are delivering return on investment, whether that's media, economics, international visitation, all those kind of things. So you've got to understand what you're really delivering and what you want to do and have a long-term plan.
Thanks, Jeff. I think we're out of time. Quick last word, Gintech. Sam, anything you'd like to add? Great, thanks. So I think, coming back to the theme, build or buy. Clearly, portfolio approach works in some places. The opportunities of build in terms of sustainability, the long-term growth, but you need to understand your commercial models. It's very much about long-term partnerships that involve everyone from government, city, all the different agencies to brands. It's not something that can simply be done alone. Many people coming into the industry and moving out. I don't think anyone really understands from the buy perspective, research done in terms of the halo effect, what are the benefits now of what the WTA did. Obviously, it put Singapore on a pedestal. It brought new tennis players to the game, but how do you continue to build that after the events left town? Opportunities in both of those cases based on the objectives. Jeff highlighted Melbourne. It's big, grand events, and they consistently rated as the best sports city in the world on the GSI ranking and various others. So I guess it's being clear on what your strategy is, but clearly it would seem that from the build perspective, there's great opportunities across Asia for governments to work together to understand the social and health benefits, which are kind of a little bit warm and fuzzy at the moment, apart from the economic benefits, to work with event organisers and build a strategy to be able to impact their cities. Thank you very much for coming to listen to us early. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks to my panel.